Hi, I'm Catherine Llewellyn, the host of the podcast. You can find out all about Truth and Transcendence on truthandtranscendence.com. And you can find out all about me on beingspace.world, where you will find my online coaching offering as well as my UK-based workshops. The Freedom of Spirit workshop for liberation and empowerment, the Pellower Radical Shift in Consciousness workshop for spiritual expansion, and transformational coaching for exploring the mind-body-spirit connection on the expansive path. You can also support the podcast by actually making a donation. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm delighted to welcome special guest Amy L Bernstein, who's here today to talk about a lot of things, but we're going to start from kindness to self. Now, Amy has been working with writers for years, helping them deal with their self-doubt and helping them completely transform their relationship with their creativity. So she's got a fantastic and unique way of bringing this particular wisdom and transformation to her clients. And you can find Amy at amywrites.live. So Amy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Fantastic. So would you like to kick off by sharing with the listeners why this theme of kindness to self? I mean, everyone's talking about being good to ourselves and taking care of ourselves at the moment, but you've got a very particular relationship with kindness to self, haven't you? Which relates to some significant moments in your life. Would you like to share a bit of that with the listeners?
Yes, and let's start from some broad observations, and we can get more into the personal as well. You know, we are living in cultures right now that are in many ways very punitive and very harsh. And even when people are making an effort to be so kind and generous to one another in a very intimate way, when we look out at our broader communities, at political discourse, at media, at social media, there is a lot going on there that is not kind to individuals, not kind to groups, not kind to certain kinds of identities, not kind to communities. And I fear that a lot of that creates a lot of internal anxiety for us, and it becomes sort of harder to push back against these narratives that are not particularly kind. We live in really punitive cultures with so much comparison-itis going on, where someone else looks like they have more than you, they're doing better than you, their life is better and easier than yours. And all of this really kind of rubs us. And when we're talking about kindness to self, I just feel it is increasingly difficult to give ourselves the grace and the compassion that we might extend to others, because we feel that we are being judged, and that we want to be better, and we're so hard on ourselves as a result of that. So we're swimming upstream here in a way. Do you think that's true?
I think that's very interesting, that angle you just took on it around being in a culture where there's unkindness, linking back to us comparing ourselves with others and then judging ourselves negatively. I think there can be a connection like that. And I do think you're right that we have a culture where we're encouraged to idealize certain ways of being or certain ways of looking, and that always has a kind of a negative implication, because no one actually really looks like that. No one's life is really like that, is it?
Right. We're shown perfection as if it's reality, and it's not. And I can tell you, and you probably know this as well, in creative communities, meaning writers and other artists, because I've worked with quite a number of different artists over the past couple of years. It is really, there's a real disconnect between accepting with and living with the discomfort of your own imperfect processes, your own sort of imperfect way of making art, the fact that there really is no such thing as perfection, that juxtaposed against what we're shown, what we see. And this notion, certainly in writing communities, that, oh, well, this author is doing so well, they must be so much better than I am, which means I must not be very good at this. And so we get into this very unhappy cycle, the antithesis of a virtuous cycle. And I think it's very difficult to shift our mindset away from that. Yet it's so important that we try to do that, and we need to kind of be mindful and adapt strategies that help us to be kind to ourselves.
I agree. You just reminded me of, you're no doubt familiar with Isaac Asimov, the writer.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of his books. And of course, everyone thinks Asimov, incredibly successful guy, loved the world over. Well, he did an article at one point where he was printing all of these rejection letters he had at the beginning. And he had so many of them. And some of them were really harsh, and he could have just given up at that point. And I thought, my God, if a giant like him had all those rejection letters, that just goes to show that we don't need to kind of give up at the initial point of it not immediately going the way we hoped it would.
Right, because self-doubt is an extraordinarily universal part of the human condition that we don't acknowledge and talk about enough. And for the reason, and so there's a great example, and there's a million examples like that. I spoke with someone just last night who said something. I feel like I know everything there is to know about the Beatles because that's the era I grew up in. Someone said that Ringo Starr, to this day, the man is 85, is incredibly nervous before he gets on stage to perform. Why would Ringo Starr have an ounce of nervousness, which really is a reflection of self-doubt of, am I going to do this well? Am I going to meet the fans' expectations, right? How is it that can persist in someone who by every single measure has been exceeded, success measures in every way? And even Stephen King, the writer, he tossed in the waste can his first novel manuscript. His wife pulled it out of the waste basket. I think this is true. I don't think this is an apocryphal story because, is that sense of, this is terrible. I can't do this. This is awful. And of course, it became his first book and his first bestseller. So it is so universal, and we kind of deny it. We don't acknowledge it. We're afraid to grapple with it. And part being kind to ourselves is to acknowledging these parts of ourselves that are real and painful and where we live in discomfort. But we can manage that and turn it into something positive.
Right. Well, before I ask you how we turn it into something positive, which of course I would not like to know the answer to that, the word humility came up in my mind while you were talking. How do you have a way of explaining the difference between self-doubt and a kind of helpful, receptive humility? Because I think those are two separate things. Have you kind of explored the difference between those things?
I haven't thought of it that way, but first of all, I agree with you that they are different. And let me respond this way. I think humility, genuine humility, comes from a place of peace and self-acceptance, where we understand our own competencies and we're comfortable with those. And self-doubt may still exist in other realms or in other contexts, but this aspect can also exist. This notion of humility, kind of a being at peace with oneself, accepting who we are and what we can do. And I just think it's one of the many ways in which we humans are masses of contradiction, because you can have humility and have that sense of peace and competence in one area of your life, and then, like Ringo Starr, be running out across the stage because you're so nervous to perform for the 10,000th time in another part of our lives. So it's interesting to reflect on those dichotomies.
Yeah. So yes, circling back then, so you said it can be turned into something positive and creative. So would you share with us about that?
Yes, and I've really been developing and playing around with several strategies which all relate to mindset, about how we can walk with self-doubt and continue to pursue really ambitious goals, even when we're feeling filled with doubt. Doubt need not stop us. I don't think we can banish it, but it need not stop us in our tracks, which it so often does. We can walk with it and, in a sense, tiptoe past it in a way. So how do we do that? This is all in our heads, right? So you really need to begin by acknowledging that you feel doubtful. And that can show up as anxiety, as procrastination, as analysis paralysis, where you feel incapable of making a decision because you're so worried about making a wrong choice, what looks like a wrong choice. It can even lead to depression because, inaction and feeling disconnected can lead to feelings of depression and isolation. We need to acknowledge all these feelings first and not push them aside and not just deny them, because we can't deal with them if we don't acknowledge them, right? So that's an important starting point. And then when we get into really trying to manage our mindset about these things, one of the first things that we can do is force ourselves to, as I put it, change the channel. If you think of an old style radio dial where you're flipping around from one station to another, the voices of negativity, of doubt, of incompetence will win if we let them. They will shout in our heads very loudly and they will dominate. And what you can do about that is stop and remind yourself of what you're good at, how you succeeded, how you've exceeded your own expectations and that of others, moments in your life when you rose above and beyond what you thought you were capable of doing, where you pushed past a boundary. Remind yourself of all the times you've done that in different parts of your life and dwell in that channel and not just in the negative channel. And remind yourself that this is a balance, right? It's not all about the doubt and the doubt's winning, because there are things that you can do that you are competent at, that you are successful at, and you will succeed again. That's a really important starting place.
Yeah. Wow. So you're obviously very connected to these two themes of self-doubt and kindness to self. Were you born that way, or?
Oh, I was born. I was born as a champion doubter. I have lived with so much doubt. And I realized, looking back on my life, all the ways it stopped me from pursuing dreams and goals that seemed, I came up with all the reasons why I couldn't, why I shouldn't. And I think self-doubt, fearing change, fearing risk, fearing testing myself, all these things were always stopping me. And I reached a point in my own life where I said, no more. This is not how I will live, the last third of my life. I'm not going to do this. I need to be a different person. And I really worked on that very hard. And I think where kindness to self comes into play here is, I've always been one of those people, incredibly self-critical. I never did something well enough or as well as I thought I could. So I've always been so hard on myself. And I do think that I got some of that from my parents, probably in subtle ways and maybe not so subtle ways. And being an intensely self-critical person can drive you on, but it can also really hold you back. And I'm still learning how to be kind to myself. The joy of accepting your own mistakes. I mean, there's so much freedom in that. One reason I'm so cheerful about going on so many podcasts, for example, is I may misstate something. I may put something poorly. I may have a moment where I freeze or lose track of my thoughts. So what? We all make mistakes. And when we're afraid of that, we're not being kind to ourselves. We need to embrace ourselves, warts and all, and not demand perfection, which is a way of being unkind to ourselves, I think.
Yeah. So was it just a decision that you made at a certain point in your life that then began you down a different path? Because that's interesting, because you said you thought, right, I'm going to change this for the final third of my life. Do you think that the fact you were the age you were at that moment was significant in that being the right timing for that? Because the question comes up for me, when is the moment and why is it then? And how is it then that moment can, because obviously there are people who considered coming and working with you. And some of those people will be not ready. And some of them will be, yeah, this is absolutely the right time. I'm going to contact her now. Right. So there's an interesting transition point there, isn't there? A kind of I don't know if it's a pivoting point or if it's a quick thing or if it's a gradual thing. What was it like for you?
Yes, it's a wonderful question, because let's acknowledge that this is definitely different for everyone. That said, I think it is not at all uncommon to reach middle age, however we define that, 40s, 50s. And this classic question arises, which was also a famous song, is that all there is? And it's a really normal question to have in, certainly, I'm most familiar with the way Western cultures operate, which is, you get a job and you work toward your career and you go, 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 and you have your family, you do all these things, and you wake up one day. And many of us have that day, and we wake up and say, is that all there is? And at that moment, whatever age you are, you're looking to connect with something more deeply passionate in you that you want to accomplish in your life. It's often creative, often. The reason being, we've had to sideline creative impulses, creative energies, creative endeavors for things that are quote unquote more practical for so long. But there's that voice in you that's calling out. Now, by creative, this could be almost anything. It can be that you really want to start a company, be an entrepreneur. That's an intensely creative endeavor. Or it could be that you want to do something in the arts, or it could be something else. And you want to start a podcast. That's a very creative thing to do. And at that moment, you have some very important choices to make. And here's where I think it starts. When you wake up that morning, so to speak, and you say, is this all there is? It's not enough. I need more for my life. You need to, first of all, be willing to start small, to take small steps. You are not necessarily in a position to upend everything and start traveling the world with a backpack to discover yourself. If you can do that, great. Most of us can't. But you can start small, and starting small simply begins with giving yourself permission to look for ways to step out of your current comfort zone. You need to begin to learn how to explore and take new kinds of risk, do things that scare you. That doesn't necessarily mean bungee jumping off a cliff. Do things that scare you, embrace new kinds of risk, and see how that feels and get comfortable with that new kind of discomfort. Do things that are absolutely not connected to making money, that are not connected to deadlines, that are not connected to specific outputs and outcomes. These can be scary things because they're the antithesis of the culture that we operate in. I think that's where you begin. You give yourself permission to think differently about how you operate, and then you can begin to take steps towards something new.
One example that sprang to mind for me, one of the things I like to do for my own enjoyment, and I've also learned to facilitate it as well, is conscious dance, conscious movement work. And I've had so many conversations with people who've used that particular vehicle, if you like, of stepping onto a dance floor with no alcohol, no drugs, no talking, and just moving with the body, and using that as a way of doing exactly what you just described, viewing themselves in a new way. And it's very new. It's in practical terms, it's low risk because they're not going to lose their family, they're not going to lose their job, they're not going to lose their money. It'll probably cost them £10, £15 to do it, but it makes a shift for them. So that's what my mind responded with when you said that just then. Is that an example of the sort of thing you're referring to?
I think that is a beautiful example because you're coming at it from a somatic perspective, right from in the body. I'm always in the mind, and I have to remind myself the mind is connected to the body is connected to the mind. So you're using this example of movement, of sort of somatic shift. And I picture myself in the scenario that you just described. I am not a natural dancer. I don't move my body without tremendous sense of being very self-conscious. So for me to do that, that would be out of my comfort zone. That would be taking a risk. And, if I were to do that, I would have to be giving myself permission to step into that place of discomfort for the experience of whatever might come up, a new kind of joy, or just a new sense of freedom that I didn't have before. We're simply throwing off that yoke of self-consciousness, which leads us on to other interesting things. So that would be an interesting thing for me to try. And it's not something that I gravitate to, but that's all the more reason to try. So I think that's a great example of you're using this sort of somatic way of getting at these things that I'm talking about in an emotional, psychological way.
Yeah, fantastic. Whereas for someone else, because there are people who do that sort of activity all the time. So for them, something to step outside the comfort zone would be something completely different. It might be
Right. Right. If I told that person, okay, I want you to start journaling every day. You're gonna write one page every day. And they're like, I don't now writing, I don't do that. I don't do that. I have nothing to say. No, just try it. Just try it. You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Right.
Or go to an energy healing workshop. They might be, no, I can't do that. So it's interesting looking at what are the things that will help us to step outside of our limited view of ourselves, I suppose is what we're talking about.
Yes. I think, well, yes, because what we're really talking about is change. We're talking about changing our conception of ourselves as people moving through the world and how we see our lives unfolding from this point forward. So we know change is scary. And I know that I went through years where I kept saying to myself, I've got to make a change. I've got to make a change. I'm miserable. I've got to make a change. It took me a long time to figure out what to do, which is fine. That was my process. I think that's not unusual. Um, and I inched my way toward it. And then once you get to that point, you have to then be willing to embrace that change and begin to go through whatever that feels like. And let's not lose sight of the fact that people around you won't always be your allies in this endeavor. People who love you can be your adversaries because they come at you with, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do, well, you're doing fine. Why do you want to go shift? Why do you want to make these changes? Why this isn't who you are? It's like, oh gosh, you don't want to spend time on that. These people are not understanding what we're going through, and they may even be coming at us from their own perspective of fear because change is scary, including in other people. And so we need to surround ourselves with allies, people who will truly support and encourage unconditionally our desire to make change. And that's something to be very aware of as we go down that road.
Yeah. Now that's a very interesting conundrum, isn't it? Because those people who love us do love us and we do love them. So many of them should remain in our lives. So then there's a whole question of how do we navigate that? Because when I was much younger, there was the thing you've just said to me. If I'd heard you say that when I was much younger, in my 20s, let's say, I would have been just dumping a whole bunch of people and picking up with a whole new bunch of people and actually squandering a lot of really beautiful, loving connection that is genuinely very, very important, apart from that sort of niggle that they're a bit frightened for me trying something new. So obviously you have all these conversations with your clients, and from listening to you, I can tell that you've had these conversations with yourself over the years.
Once or twice.
So what about that conundrum, the beloved people who we need to stay with, we want to stay connected with, but at the moment they are maybe temporarily our adversaries in this endeavor. What do we do?
Exactly. I do think there are a few strategies, and let me be the first to admit that I have not put these strategies into play perfectly. I'm still working on it, right? But this is what I've learned. We don't need to kick those people out of our lives, particularly if they're close to us for many other reasons, by blood, by marriage, by friendship, whatever it may be. I think you can do a couple of different things. I think you can turn to these people and with great kindness say, look, I understand that you're not really getting what I'm trying to do here, and you're skeptical, and I understand that. But this is what I am doing now, and it matters a great deal to me. So I'm fine if we don't talk about this. I'm just going to go off and do my thing, and we don't have to talk about this. Don't worry about me. I'm doing fine, and I have other people who are supporting me in this, and so it's all good. We're good. We don't have to make this a topic of conversation between us. So you're giving them permission to cut off that part of you, which makes them uncomfortable. And the classic example is the writer or the aspiring writer who goes home at Christmas to the family, and they're all like, "Why haven't you finished that book yet? Why are you writing a book? What? I mean, are you going to sell? I mean, are you going to sell this? Are you ever going to make any money with this?" And they're just incredibly beaten down and bombarded, right? And so I think there's this point at which if we believe in ourselves, in that part of ourselves that is trying something new, being risky and creative, whatever it might be, we have to own that, and we have to be able to say to them, listen, I really appreciate your concerns. I'm doing fine, and I found a lot of people to support me in this, so we don't have to talk about it anymore. In fact, I'd be happy not to discuss it. That is one approach. That's not going to work for everybody. And again, I readily admit I've not been able to implement that fully in my own life, but I've been through enough to see I think it's a really good direction. And while you're doing that, we need to beef up the other side. We have to find the people and the institutions that are going to support us. It can be a writing community, it can be an artist community, it can be a course, it can be a workshop, it can be a program, a degree program, I mean, whatever this thing is. It can be an apprenticeship where you're going to get the support and encouragement that keeps you grounded and excited in that thing you're trying to do, which is a counterweight to the skepticism that's in other parts of your life. So that's certainly one approach for people to try out.
I think that's fantastic. I think that first one you just said is absolute genius. And I think because that is you're completely taking the pressure off when you do that, aren't you? You're giving them complete permission to just have their own point of view. So you're not fighting with their point of view, and you're not inviting or encouraging them to fight with your point of view. So you're making space, I'm not surprised when you say that you haven't implemented that fully, because that must be quite a challenge to implement fully. I've actually implemented something of that on occasion, I recognize now from what you said, but it definitely took an extraordinary amount of, I don't know what you might call it, Zen detachment to do it. It was not easy to do. Genius.
Yeah, well, there's one more facet of it and this really comes from my lived experience, which is we feel that we're attempting something amazing, exciting, creative, new, and there are people in our lives who don't see it and don't even value it. They don't care. It's the opposite of why are you doing? It's like not the skeptical reaction. It's invisible to them reaction. So for me to say to my family, I just signed a contract for my third traditionally published novel. I mean, I'm incredibly excited about this. Now, I don't say that to my family because I fundamentally feel that they don't care. So here's something that's to me, such an incredible, powerful achievement that I've done in my life. It's been really hard won, and it's not of value to them. So when you're in that situation, and I don't think that's uncommon, I think you need to then keep that part of your life separate. I do have people in my life who value that tremendously, and I can talk to them about it. And I don't have to talk to my family about it, because I don't need to get that sort of nothingness back from them, which is not validating. I'll get the validation elsewhere. And I think we have to be really honest about this.
Yeah. So what about that thought form that some of us might have, which says, okay, if they love us, and if what I'm doing really is important, then they should value it. So if they're not valuing it, there's something wrong. What about that thought form?
Only because I'm finally turning into an old person can I say, you know what? We need to meet people where they are. And should is a great word, but that's not who people are. Like they don't always meet our expectations, do they? They don't live up to our expectations. They just don't. And so we meet them where they are. We say, okay, this is you. I can see that I would love you to value this and care about this side of me and ask me questions. I would love that, but that's not who you are. And so at some point I can't change you. So I think we need to reach that point too. That's a hard one. That has taken me a lifetime. But it's tremendously relieving when you get there. Can't change you. You are who you are. I'm just going to meet you where you are.
Yeah. Fantastic. And also, I think to celebrate the fact there are still people around who care about us is always a good thing.
Exactly.
In life.
Exactly.
We haven't actually alienated everybody at this point, which is fantastic. So when you're working with people, are they talking to you about all these sorts of issues in the work, and how are you helping them?
Well, I'm as a book coach, I'm helping authors and aspiring authors develop a book that deserves to live in the world and be read by other people. That process brings up tremendous amounts of self-doubt and anxiety, even in people who have written and published before. And so what I'm doing a lot as a book coach. I'm an accountability partner, but I'm really also a champion for their right to write, and to help them see that, yes, this is difficult. You might be stuck. You might feel bewildered. You might not see how to go forward. We're going to find a way forward. There's a way forward for you. And when writers are muddling through early drafts of material, it's often it's not right. It's not good enough. It's not working. That is part of the discomfort of the writing process. It is just part of it. You have to live with it. And one of my roles is to help that writer through the enormous amount of self-doubt. It's like, well, I guess I can't do this. If this is terrible, I guess I can't do it. No, no, no. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is this is a process. Your thinking is evolving. You will get better at this. We will make it better. We'll look at ways to make it better. There's strategizing that goes on. So that's a difficult place for many, many, many writers to be in. And as a book coach, that's one of the things that I help them through. And many, many writers, they wouldn't write it. They wouldn't be able to write their book at all or get it framed up were it not for that sort of encouragement, which every writer needs and every creative person needs.
Yeah. And do you think that's the biggest barrier to creating a wonderful book? Because I think some people would imagine that the greatest barrier is having no talent or not being able to write well. But when you're speaking, it sounds more like the actual self-doubt, which is a piece of our psychology, actually, is a bigger issue. Is that the case?
I think it's sometimes in all of the above situation. Writing is intensely lonely. You really only write by yourself, right? And so that's an opportunity for self-doubt to be very loud and persistent because there's nobody there to tell you otherwise. So I think that many, many writers abandon projects or don't begin projects because the doubt stops them before they can start. And I understand that. It's a very daunting thing. Or many writers, they quit, they get partway through and they quit because it's really hard. It's always harder than we think it is. I mean, I'm starting a new novel right now and I have enormous doubts about, is this going to work? Am I going to figure it out? I'm really not sure. But I've been through it enough that I'm talking myself off that ledge to say to myself, oh, stick with it. You're in an uncomfortable place. You're going to find a way through. Don't give up. Let's consider that not an option. Let's find a way through. Keep thinking about it. Keep noodling around. Let your unconscious do some of the work. So you have to kind of have that patience with yourself and with your own process, so that the doubts don't drown you. But in writing, it's very difficult to strike the balance.
Yeah. Well, I must say, I recently developed like a new sort of suite of offerings, workshops and trainings and things like that. So it's not a book, but there is writing involved in putting it together and creating workbooks and the whole thing. And I hit a lot of self-doubt along the way. And you're absolutely right. Working by yourself, you hit the self-doubt. And sometimes it's almost enough to think, actually, the whole project is a bad idea. And then I've gone away and come back and looked at it and said, and actually, the project's a good idea. That bit needs tweaking. That's not the same thing as dumping the entire project. So I've noticed there's a sort of tunnel vision thing that can happen with self-doubt, where because one thing is not quite right, you think, right, I've got to throw out the whole thing. Do you find that happens sometimes with your clients?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And that's also what leads to, certainly in writing, it leads to a form of perseveration where people are they're rewriting an opening paragraph obsessively because they can't force themselves to move on to bigger problems or to more, developing more content. So they find this little comfort zone. Well, I'll just rewrite this page, over this paragraph over and over and over and over and over and live there. I can live right there. That's good. So yeah, I mean, yes, and I think there's no end ways to which this sort of manifests itself. And if you're, all these creative acts that we pursue are hard, and doing hard things requires us to bring an awful lot of energy from so many parts of ourselves sort of to the task. And that, there's nothing easy about that.
No. Well, I could imagine you'd be a very supportive and helpful coach to have in that situation. So I very much thank you for sharing all of these different approaches to this. I think this is very important. And I've also really taken that you were saying that this relates to any creative endeavor. So,
Yes.
and I relate it back to podcasting. You know, obviously I have a podcast, so I've encountered self-doubt and trying to deal with that. And I actually have a podcast coach who, one of the things he's helped me with is self-doubt. Interestingly, I don't know whether he realizes that's what he's doing. He probably does. He's quite sharp. But yeah, it's really important. So if I just slightly shift the frame of what we're talking about, you mentioned right at the beginning that there's this culture around us of where we're witnessing quite a lot of lack of kindness in the world. I like to think there are a lot of people in the world who are trying to be part of the solution. And obviously part of that is fostering kindness to people. And some of those are, you know, formally, officially leaders. And some of those are, you know, parents, community influencers, all kinds of people trying to be part of the solution. Some of those people are probably listening to us right now. Is there something you'd like to say to those people in relationship to either kindness to self or self-doubt, or kind of a combination of those things?
Wow, that's a tall order. That feels like a commencement speech. Um, I guess I should just speak from my own experience and perspective, which is I find myself increasingly trying to be as kind as I can, as often as I can, to as many people as I can. And I'm not doing heroic things, but I'm trying to recognize that we're all living under enormous pressures. They're external, they're financial, they're psychological, they're familial, they're climate change weighs heavily on people. There's big existential things out there that are worrying us, and then there are things closer to home that are worrying us. Certainly in the United States, we are consumed with worry and anxiety right now about the state of our country. And at the end of the day, I feel like all I have to give is my own empathy to those that I come in contact with. If I can do that, that's part of my job as a human being. It should always have been, but now I'm much more aware of it. And so I guess I'm trying to keep this very grounded perspective. I'm doing things with writing groups that are trying to speak, truth to power and this kind of thing, and that's collective action. But as an individual, it's about looking at the person working in a service industry, at a cash register or in a restaurant, and realizing how fraught their own lives may be, and showing as much kindness and compassion to them as you can, all the way through to, the people that you know and love well, and who are also going through things, and trying to show them that. So I think it's just what we try to do each day, and I don't do it perfectly every day, that's for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Beautiful. Very simple, very practical, very accessible. So let's just remind people where to find you. And I've got a couple of wrap-up questions before we go. So it's amywrites.live, AMYWRITES.live. So, Amy, we've talked about a lot today, and it's been fascinating and very touching as well. I think this whole topic is very, very human topic. Was there been a favorite part of our conversation for you today?
Oh, goodness. I have loved this conversation. I love the theme of kindness to self weaving in and out of everything that we're talking about. And I love that we've talked about ways for people to take control of their creative lives, and, give themselves permission. So I feel it's been powerful and hopefully helpful to so many people who are looking to make change and aren't sure how to start.
Wonderful. And would you like to leave the listeners with something to take away? Sometimes a guest would like to leave the listeners with some sort of reflection question or contemplation question that will help them connect more strongly with what we've been talking about.
I would offer to everyone that you owe it to yourself. You deserve to connect with your passion, with what you are passionate about, and to give yourself permission to pursue that thing, that course, that service, that line, whatever it is, you deserve to pursue that, to explore it, and you deserve to try and to fail and to succeed and all the things. And don't hold yourself back. We get this one life to live, and everyone deserves to make that attempt to live it in some way that feels as meaningful to them as possible.
Beautiful. Fantastic. So listeners, contemplate that over the coming week. Amy, it's been an absolute delight to have you on today, and I wish you a beautiful day. And to everyone watching and listening, that's all for Truth and Transcendence for today. Please give us a 5-star rating and a thumbs up, and share with your friends, and comment on what we were discussing today if you're reading this or watching this or listening to this somewhere where you can do that. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time. And thanks again, Amy.
Thank you, Catherine.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. It really helps if you give a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, a review, and share with your friends. If you're looking for transformational coaching or an intensive transformational weekend workshop experience, I can help with that. You can actually help the show by making a donation. Until next time, take care.